Come on, tape. Right.
Tales of Weird Stuff presents VCF East 2023.
Last year I went to VCF West, so this year I decided to give VCF East a try. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so VCF East is a much larger journey for me. I have family and friends on that side of the country, so I made a big trip out of this. I left home on April 8th, the weekend before the festival, and I didn't return until May 1st. Let me tell you, 24 days and 2,500 miles on the rental car is probably too long of a trip. Now, VCF East was, for me, a very different kind of event from VCF West. And I'll talk more about this periodically during the video. But it all starts with the location. VCF West is held at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California. That building was previously part of SGI. As such, it has the quintessential Silicon Valley office park feel to it, because that's what it is. VCF East, on the other hand, is held at the InfoAge Science and History Museum in Wall Township, New Jersey. These buildings, because it's spread across multiple buildings, were previously part of a World War II era military base, and I want to say like radar station. The age of the buildings and facilities alone give the event a very different kind of feel. And I don't know how well it comes through in this bit of video, but the 10-foot fence topped with barbed wire definitely discouraged people trying to get into the consignment room early. But more about the consignment room later. The festival is 3 days, but the second day, Saturday, is the big day. Friday was mostly about people arriving to set up their booths, so there wasn't nearly as much to see, but it was a lot easier to talk to people. I recorded this walkthrough Saturday morning. I got a new toy this year, a gimbal for my camera, so hopefully this walkthrough video will be less nauseous than my VCF West or my Portland Retro Gaming Expo walkthrough videos. I'm still getting used to this gadget, so there are a bunch of times when the camera moves in odd ways. For some reason, I always panned up when I wanted to pan down and vice versa. I think I was thinking in terms of rotating the camera instead of moving where the camera is pointing, sort of the flight controls versus non-flight controls thing. I'll get used to it eventually. There were many people at VCF West who had done something noteworthy back in the day. Burger Becky talked about the 3DO Doom port, Lynn Tramiel talked about the prototype PET machine, and so on. VCF East, on the other hand, was, for lack of a better term, a YouTuber convention. I don't think I had more than a 5-minute stretch when there wasn't someone in my field of view who I recognized as a big YouTuber. People who have over 100,000 subscribers on their channel. Not everyone was super enthusiastic about this, especially when the topic of removing surface mount capacitors would come up. There were a couple times when I heard sentiments that I won't repeat on YouTube. If you ever meet me over a beer sometime, you can ask. I'll tell you what people said. Now, for me, this wasn't necessarily good or bad. It was just different. It was absolutely fun to meet and chat with people who I only know through YouTube or Twitter. And I even got recognized for a couple times, and that was definitely a first and kind of weird. I still haven't decided how I feel about it. I found it interesting to see multiple displays of early small office Unix-ish multi-user systems. I kind of consider Xenix Unix-ish. I don't know. Maybe that's unduly harsh. I don't know. Anyway, this Televideo system and the Altos system displayed in another corner of this room will appear again later on in this video. See what I mean? You can't go anywhere without a YouTuber jumping out in front of your camera. My biggest regret of the whole festival is that I didn't spend any quality time with this PDP-11 running a very, very early version of Unix. Fans of the channel will know that I have a thing for older Unix systems, and they don't get much older than this. Many years ago, I had this same terminal missing the keyboard. It's on the list of things that I wish I could have kept, but had to purge due to space considerations. Don't worry, I will talk about the Onyx 2 later. How could I not? Funny story, Apple's other Unix was just AIX running on this Apple network server. Everyone thought this PDP-8A looked like a window air conditioning unit.
It almost looks like an air conditioner, doesn't it?
It does.
I really appreciated this display of cube computers. Mac G4 Cube, Cobalt Cube, Next Cube. Very, very classy display. I've never seen a Model 1 expansion interface with a solid metal case like this. Apparently there were third parties that made compatible expansion interfaces. I had no idea. These various TRS-80s, at least one is a Model 16, are running Xenix and other interesting operating systems. I would love to play around with a Model 16 or an upgraded Model 2 someday. So many SGIs. VCF West had a massive collection of Sun computers, so I guess VCF East needed to have a huge collection of SGIs. Now, of course, the irony there is that VCF West was in an old SGI office building. Now, I am definitely going to revisit these later. This part of the walkthrough really highlights one of the other big differences with VCF West. VCF West is in a much larger facility, so things are more spread out. This event is a lot more dense. If you are at all phobic of having 1,000 of your closest friends right in your personal space all the time, this is likely not a good event for you. Oftentimes, this room was so packed, you practically couldn't move at all. I didn't really get the full backstory on this display. It was some sort of hardware and software combination for editing images and possibly video in real time. At one point, I heard the guy describe it as Photoshop before computers were fast enough to run Photoshop. So I wish I had come back and looked at this a little bit more closely. It seemed interesting. But there was kind of a lot to see. This display of computers from the Weather Channel was really interesting. These were mostly drop-in modules sold to local cable channels to display the Weather Channel. Now, these folks have reverse engineered the protocol that the Weather Channel used, and they were streaming the local weather data to these computers to create the real old school display. That is really cool. I would love to have been able to look inside some of the later machines that were in this display, because at one point back in the day, the Weather Channel funded development of open source graphics drivers for like the Radeon 8500. So my assumption is that some of these computers probably have a Radeon 8500 in them running those open source graphics drivers, and that would have been really cool to see. Unsurprisingly, the Info Age Science and History Museum has its own computer museum. Now, I'm not sure if all of the items on display here are from the permanent collection, or if some of them, particularly towards the latter end of the walkthrough, are just on loan for the festival. What I am sure of is a lot of the items on display here are also in either my personal collection or the collections of some of my friends. At least the personal computing items. I don't know anyone who has a Cray or whatever any of the stuff on this first sidewall is. I don't like crazy analog computers. In like 1943, Thomas Watson, president of IBM, is famous for having said, I think there's a world market for 5 computers. People scoff at that. But when computers look like this, that's probably fair. The background noise that you can hear in this room, and you would normally expect a museum room to be pretty quiet. That background noise is the Univac running. I'm going to come back to this computer. Like a bunch of the other things, I'm going to revisit this and take a little bit of a closer look at it. But holy smokes, that thing was loud. I won't complain about a Power Mac G5 being loud again. Okay, maybe I will. No promises. I was really drawn to this deck display. Those digital branded floppy drives are gorgeous. And then we get into the more consumer-oriented items like these CPU trainer systems and then a variety of home computers. While I do know someone who owns a SWT PC 6800 computer, much like the one shown here, I don't know anyone who owns one of those terminals. Look at that thing. That thing's adorable. Now, I would guess that this Naboo and perhaps a bunch of these other computers are on loan to the museum from VCF itself. It would really surprise me if this museum already just happened to have a Naboo. That would... It's not impossible, but it does seem improbable. By any reasonable measure, I have a much larger than average Texas Instruments computer collection. I have several TI-99s of various flavors. I have multiple PEBs, lots of expansion cards, cartridges, manuals, yada, yada, yada. I have a lot of stuff, but I don't have one of these. And frankly, I don't know what this is. And I was very surprised to see this, and I had to make a note to come back after the show and look this up and figure out what the heck it is. I haven't done that yet. It's still on my to-do list. Respond in the comments if you have any clue what this is, or if you had one currently or back in the day. I found this to be a very well curated small display of computer mice. There are a bunch of interesting specimen in here, and looking at it, I think I have probably 40 or 50% of the mice that are in here, including some of the more rare ones. One of the displays at VCF West had a Motorola 88,000 computer nearly identical to this one. This particular display expands to a collection of 88K based computers. I think that other display was targeted at multiprocessor computers. Now, unfortunately, Maki was never able to get this X terminal booting from the network during the festival. This X terminal uses an 88,000 processor in it. That terminal is basically identical to the one that I had on my desk for years when I worked at Sequent Computer Systems. The main difference being the X terminal that I used had a giant Nokia 21-inch CRT on it. The system displayed in the middle here is a VME bus based system. The processor card sitting on the table is a VME card. This is a bus interface that Motorola used quite a lot back in the day, and I believe, I'd have to go double check, but I believe that early Sun systems that used 6,000 to 8,000 processors also used VME.
So that's
Okay.
part of the boot where it shows the processor.
Okay, all right, so it's got 4 CPUs, 25 megahertz, blazing fast. RISC fulfilling its promise.
Yeah, the K2 has the 33 megahertz version.
Okay. That's cool. Used to.
I imagine it makes a pretty big difference.
Yes. It makes everything a lot more steady, for sure. I learned last year. So is this the video board here then?
Yep, that's the video card.
Okay.
That's the Ethernet card.
Nice.
There's the memory underneath.
Oh yeah, all those SIPs. Oh my gosh, and there's so many of them. How many? Because I can see at least a dozen.
I have 4 banks of them.
Okay, all right, so 6. No, man. Excellent. That is super cool. This SGI Visual Workstation 320 and the bigger Visual Workstation 540 have such an unusual architecture. I doubt I'll ever acquire either one, but I do have the matching 1600 monitor shown here. This Alpha 164LX motherboard is also very high on my wish list. This is one of the last HP PA RISC workstations ever made, if not the last. Linux support for it is a little bit sketchy, especially for graphics. And that's a huge bummer because it has an AGP Pro slot. By all accounts, if graphics could work on it, it would have been the fastest Quake machine on the table. I'm not going to talk too much about these machines because End Commander gave a really good talk at the festival about all of these systems and his adventures with them. Suffice to say, these are among the only PowerPC systems to have ever existed that can run Windows NT. Now, that makes them neat all by themselves. The IBM machines can also run AIX, and I have one of those 43p machines, and I'm going to mess around with it at some point also. I had not previously heard of Altos computers, but this Altos 586 is a really cool device. I'm assuming the name is 5 due to 512 kilobytes of RAM and 86 due to the 8086 computer. This did not have a Pentium in it. With a 40 megabyte hard drive, this computer cost around $10,000 in 1984, and that's the equivalent of over $30,000 today. But for that price, you got a really solid computer and a really nice multi-user environment running either Xenix or what was MP/M, which I don't know if that's related to CPM or not. I suspect that 10K either didn't include any terminals or only included one. So to actually get multiple users on it at a time, additional parts were needed. As far as I can tell, these Televideo systems are conceptually similar to the Altos systems, but took a somewhat different approach. Rather than using 8086 CPUs, these used Z80 CPUs, had a little bit different hardware configuration, but did a lot of the same kinds of things and were targeting the same kinds of small office users. These came out, I believe, a couple years earlier. I want to say like 1981. So they were like 3 years older or so. These were configured only as single user systems instead of multi-user in this display. I'm not 100% sure if this is how this computer was supposed to be arranged, or if the monitor was supposed to sit on top of the computer. It's not clear to me, but I really like what was done for it at this exhibit, so that you can see the circuit board and see the computer actually operating. I think that was a really, really good choice. I had to stop for a moment and take a look at this AT&T. I know it goes by a couple names, 3B1, a couple other names that I'm blanking on, but I had to take a look at this because for all of the representation that Unix had at this festival, this was the only AT&T Unix hardware on display. Finally, it's time to take a look at all of this SGI hardware that was on display. This little laptop here is not SGI itself, but it is a terminal connected to this massive Onyx 2 in the background. This, I want to say, 8 CPU behemoth. I can't believe that they brought something like this. This is such a huge computer, and as cool as it is, like, it just kind of sits there. Like, this was a render farm, right? That was its job, was doing big computations in the background on all those super fast RISC CPUs. But still, I love that it's on display here. Of course, I had to check the hardware inventory on it. R12K CPU, 8 gigs of RAM, Infinite Reality 2K graphics. Nice. While I have no dreams of ever owning a beast like the Onyx 2, an Octane is much more within reach. I even like the SGI LCD. Trying to run HINV on this machine proves to me that typing with just my non-dominant hand is hard. The 195 MHz R10 CPU and ESI graphics mark this as a lower-end Octane, but it's still a beefy workstation. These graphics boards required that a texture module be purchased separately, or all texture mapping operations were done on the CPU. Fortunately, this system has the texture module. Couldn't remember if Iris shipped with GL info or not. Unfortunately, no. Of course I was going to run HINV on the prototype Onyx 350. Spoiler alert, I run it on nearly all of the systems I can get at. I wanted to put this machine in my backpack. Never mind that it probably weighs 200 pounds. Dual 700 MHz R16K CPUs and V12 graphics. The V12 is the last graphics board SGI ever made, and it's a pretty decent performer with some unusual functionality that I would like to program. I'm not sure why I skipped over the Indigo 2 and the O2. I have an O2, and there's not very much variation among them due to the integrated graphics. Smile for the IndyCam! This Octane 2 has a lot more power than the previous Octane. Dual 600 MHz R14K CPUs and 2 graphics boards. One is the same ESI as in the Octane, but without the texture RAM, and the other is an EMXI, formerly known as Enhanced Maximum Impact. This has built-in dual-channel texture RAM, and as far as I know, it's the fastest graphics board in this particular family of SGI graphics cards. Both displays and keyboards are connected to the single machine. CRT monitor got back. Sorry. I think this O2 is also configured for dual displays. I know there are a couple of boards that can be added to an O2 that enable that functionality, but I'm not familiar with them as they're very uncommon. Now, I believe all three of these displays, 2 monitors and 1 TV, are driven by that same Octane that's kind of hiding in the back. I'm not sure what configuration of graphics boards enable that, but it must have cost many thousands of dollars back in the day. After passing another Octane 2 and an Octane, we get to the belle of the ball. A frickin' Tesro! This was the last MIPS workstation that SGI made, and it is a beast. These generally have the same V12 graphics boards from the previous Onyx 350. The Tesro can have up to 4 1 GHz R16K CPUs, and with appropriate graphics boards, it can drive 4 1080p displays. Now, I think the Onyx 350 is basically the rack mount version of the Tesro, but I'm not 100% sure. I know that there are a lot of similarities between the architectures. Back in the museum, I did take a look at the Univac, because basically all during the festival, they were running this thing, and that's a pretty rare treat to be able to see something like that. The thing that fascinated me the most about this, while I was here viewing it, they were loading a program from tape, is that when threading the tape through, it has to be very, very precisely aligned, and there's no automatic mechanism to do that. So there's a little sight glass, and a person has to go in and look through that sight glass and very, very precisely line up the tape to get it just perfect, or nothing will work at all, and, all is lost.
No, I was not supposed to. If you look over here on the computer, you can see the pound 1% also on the bottom. I just go in. This program is basically 3 programs in one. The first thing it does is
On Sunday, I gave my feet and my shoulders a rest from walking around carrying a backpack, and I soldered my first XT-IDE board. The neat thing about the Maker Lab that they had set up where you could do that is they had equipment there so that you could test it, so you knew you were going home with something that actually worked. See how it goes on the first boot?
Yeah, now it's going to squawk because I have the floppy drives unplugged. That's not a fault of your board.
All right.
So it'll throw a 601.
Okay.
You just repaired this?
Well, I borrowed it from a friend who was already working. My XT decided to die last week. Right as I was packing up to come.
Oh, no.
Oh, yep, you're good to go.
Yay.
This machine may not fully boot into DOS 6 because it doesn't really have enough RAM, but
right.
it did come up this time. But
Yay.
yeah, your card's good.
Been saving this topic for the very end. Let's talk about that consignment room, and let's talk about the line, because the line was ridiculously long. What you can see down the hall is just a taste of it, and after I went in and got stuff and came out, it was even longer, like clear out the door. It was ridiculous. And let me tell you what, it deserved to be, because that consignment room was so much bigger than the one at VCF West. I feel like if you're looking for any retro computer part and you live within a reasonable couple-hour drive of VCF East, go. Go just for that. There was so much stuff. Oh boy. I could have filled a ridiculous amount of luggage with computers that I left behind. I am going to do a pickups video. I think it's going to be my next video showing the stuff that I did get. It's not a lot, but this is getting long, and I want to do that in its own video and be able to talk about the things and some of the stuff that I didn't get and so on and so on. So I'm just going to leave you with these views of how it was before, because the way it was after was completely and utterly decimated. I don't feel like I'm exaggerating when I say there was maybe 2 or 3% of the stuff left. And just look at how much stuff there is here to begin with. And on Sunday, people brought out more stuff. So this is the point where I say, if you enjoyed this video, please click the like button. If you would like to see that follow-up pickups video, please click the subscribe button. And until next time, try to remember the good stuff.